Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sree's daily global COVID-19 show. My name is Sree Sreenivasan, and it's my honor to convene this daily conversation around all things COVID-19. We discuss three crises on this show: the health crisis, the financial crisis, and the racial inequality crisis. We're always looking for guests and theme suggestions. Please email me, sree@sree.net. Today is episode 157. That's right, we've been on the air for 157 straight days of lockdown in New York. We are so grateful to everyone who's joined us, our speakers, our viewers, and all our supporters. Please share this with your friends right now on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. We have a very special show for you tonight. COVID clinical trials. Our guest is Dr. Barbara Bierer, a hematologist-oncologist, a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School and Brigham and Women's Hospital. Dr. Bierer is faculty director at the Multi-Regional Clinical Trial Center of Brigham and Women's Hospital and Harvard. She will discuss diversity and equity in clinical research during and after the pandemic, focusing on the lack of and solutions for diverse representation in clinical trials. She will answer your questions. Please share this. You all know friends and family who would benefit from hearing this topic. So please tag them and they can watch right after. Hi, everybody. I'm Sree. I'm the Marshall Loeb Visiting Professor of Digital Innovation at Stony Brook School of Journalism and the co-founder of Digimentors, a social, digital, and virtual events consulting business. Our motto: don't cancel your event without talking to us. Don't even plan your virtual event without getting in touch. My email address is right here, sree@sree.net. We love to geek out on virtual events and we'd love to chat. Just email us and we'll get going. If you're joining us for the first time, let's tell you a little bit more about the show. We air every single day, and we've been doing this since the start of the crisis in New York. The first 150 episodes had 1 million plus viewers, 105 million social impressions, 281 guests, 158 of them women. We have to up that ratio as we go for the next set of shows. 57 cities and 16 countries have been represented among the guests, including the chief scientist of the World Health Organization. Doctors, nurses, authors, journalists, CEOs, founders, teachers, professors, and so many other professions. We're able to do this only because of our fabulous producers who worked with me every single day of this pandemic: Rose Horowitz at Rose Horowitz 31 and Vandana Menon, Vandana_Menon on Twitter. Please follow them. And big thanks to Scroll.in, one of India's leading news, culture, and information websites with a huge audience in the US and in other countries. You can find our archives at youtube.com/Sreenet. youtube.com/Sreenet finds you all our stories, all our videos are there. Please tag your friends right now. We're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and on LinkedIn. We also want to thank our sponsors. Muckrack Academy allowed us to put together a terrific course, if I can say so myself, Fundamentals of Social Media, free certification, now available. mrac.co/social, mrac.co/social. More than 4,000 people have taken this course, and so should you. We're also grateful to our friends at nonbelievable.com. Divinely delicious cookies on a mission. Each handcrafted cookie provides a meal to those in need. One cookie equals one meal. 20% off with the code SREE. Please check out Nonbelievable. Divinely delicious cookies on a mission. Additional funding for our projects is provided by
Hotstar Premiere Nights. Watch the year's biggest blockbusters streaming straight to your screen, exclusively on Hotstar.
A newly married couple's life is jeopardized in the new thriller Khuda Hafiz, streaming straight to your screen starting today. Use the code Sree2020 to get a less than $4 a month subscription. Hotstar.com/US, Hotstar.com/US, and use the code Sree2020. And our final promotion for tonight, we want to tell you about this very important project. You all heard what happened in Lebanon, and we will be talking to one of the organizers of a very important fundraising opportunity that will take place on Wednesday, August 19th at 11 a.m. Eastern. Hamed Sino and Farah Siraj are performing a live Facebook concert to raise funds for the anti-racism movement, an organization working with underserviced migrant communities in Lebanon who are severely affected by the explosion at the Beirut airport. They'll be broadcasting from Philadelphia starting at 11 a.m. Eastern. The event is not ticketed, but attendees are expected to donate at least $10 at givingloop.org/MCC. givingloop.org/MCC coming up on Wednesday. And with that, we are ready to meet Dr. Bierer. I know you are, so let me remind you, she is a hematologist-oncologist, a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School and Brigham and Women's Hospital. We are so thrilled that she is here with us, and let me bring her on screen right now. Hi.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. It's a Friday night in August, the time when nothing used to get done in America, and here we are, both of us working. This tells you something about our times. My first question, Doc, to everybody who joins us is, tell us how you're doing. Where are you? How's your family through the pandemic?
Well, that's kind of you to ask. My family is all well. My son's with us. My middle daughter is an intern taking care of patients, and my eldest daughter is working on actually supervising producer for a TV show that is, after being in quarantine, now being shot. We have the fortune of being healthy and being able to see one another, and I feel very fortunate in my life.
Well, we're very glad to hear that things are okay in your immediate circle. Your daughter, who does television for a living, if she's watching now, I hope she is. We ask her to forgive us for this very kind of non-TV version of what she's used to seeing. Yeah. This is our own. We're producing all of this from a little laptop here, but we're just thrilled that we have you with us on a very important topic. Tell us why people should care about this topic right now. There's so much going around, the news around COVID and clinical trials and vaccine trials. Why is this important, and what will we learn today?
So, great question. So we know that COVID-19, the infection, is significant, has disrupted almost every part of our lives, but we really don't know much about how to treat it or prevent it. We know a lot more than we did 6 months ago, and we're continuing to learn new things essentially daily. But still, we need data, we need evidence to understand how we should treat it if somebody gets infected, how we should prevent it, how we can prevent people who get infected from getting more severely ill, and how to protect the individuals around them. So that's all based, at least in part, on good epidemiology, good understanding of the disease, its attack rate, and what happens, but also on clinical trials, on testing new medicines and new approaches in people that are healthy, if you're trying vaccines, and people that are sick, and people that are hospitalized and sicker. And we can't do that without clinical trials. We need them in order to inform the way we treat people and patients in the future. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about many of the problems that have really been focused in because of the pandemic now, but are not new, in my opinion. We've had problems and underrepresentation in clinical trials for as long as we know, as long as we've been doing clinical trials. So it's an important topic, not just for COVID, but for all of the trials that we conduct.
And we're so glad you're focused on that and that we're getting a chance to discuss it. Folks, if you're watching right now, tell us where you're watching from, and also share your questions for Dr. Bierer, because we're all going to learn together. So let's start at kind of the most basic level. What is a clinical trial? We hear that word, that phrase, but we may not exactly know. And what are the steps it takes to make a clinical trial? People who are not involved in American academia may not realize how rigorous these clinical trials, when done well, are, and what are all these safeguards and things like that. I remember hearing the words principal investigator and the human research protocols and things like that at Columbia University, where I was a professor, and that was all news to me as a layman.
So, I could talk for the next hour about clinical trials and how one conducts them, how one designs them. But basically, it starts from the fundamental premise that we don't know the answer to a question we want to ask, and we want to ask it fairly and without bias, and with a study design that will give us, if we collect the data and analyze the data, a secure information that is trustworthy and that will help us in the future, that will give value in future to future treatment, diagnosis, or prevention. That depends on having a systematic analysis and being able to write down what one's going to do, so that it's not each person is treated differently, but rather patients that have common characteristics. That can be a certain age group, a certain disease, a certain problem with their liver or lungs, or lack of problem with their liver or lungs. A certain group of patients being randomly, usually assigned to receive one treatment, experimental treatment, or one treatment that is either the standard of care, or if we don't know whether anything is valuable, sometimes a placebo, a sugar pill, or another thing that really is no treatment at all. Because actually, you can give a drug that makes somebody worse, particularly if you don't know anything about that drug. When drugs are developed, they need to go through several stages before they're approved. And that's very carefully. First, we look at safety. Is the drug safe? What dose is safe? How often do you give it? What are the toxicities? What do we expect? Then, does it show any effectiveness at all? If it's safe enough to proceed, do we get any evidence that it's effective? And then we do a large clinical trial to say, in most patients, the benefit outweighs the risk. Patients of this characteristic or whatever. It's done with a protocol. As we say, we write down everything that we're going to do. And then that goes to an independent ethics review, because investigators are often pretty convinced that their ideas are going to pan out. They're they need to be, there needs to be checks and balances in the system itself. So it goes to an ethics review, and then the study is conducted, and then it's analyzed. And it's that body of evidence that we bring to bear to understand disease and what are the best treatments. Sometimes those treatments, like if you're treating cancer, you're going to have side effects from the chemotherapy, but the benefit of the chemotherapy outweighs the side effects. Sometimes that's not true, and it can be more toxic than not, or can be ineffective, or cannot be, or may not be better than another drug that we already have available. So that's the reason we do clinical trials, and of course There are lots of different kinds of trials and lots of different study designs and how you do it and all that. We can get into that if it's relevant, but that's basically the idea.
Wow, I've already learned so much, and I know people who are watching have as well. We want to tell everybody about the work that your team does at the multi-regional clinical trials and how the center works, and your real push for achieving diversity, inclusion, and equity in clinical research, and not just during the pandemic, but afterwards as well. And we're going to explore this document and show everyone how they can download and learn more themselves. So we'll take them there in just a minute. Before we do that, we wanted to see who's watching and get their greetings from around the world. As I do this, Doc, if you have been to any of these places or have a memory from there or done any work there, or even have heard of it, we can have you talk about it. And I'm going to start. Let's see who's here. Jonathan Borstein, without fail, has watched 157 straight episodes, and he's checking in from the East Village in New York. What are some of your New York memories?
Mine?
Yes.
Yeah, mine. I grew up in New York City.
So go ahead. So tell us.
I have no end of memories.
Well, when was the last time you were here, and what are you looking forward to doing when you can travel again?
Yeah, so great question. So the last time I was there was just before lockdown. So I think in January, and I went for a meeting there. My daughter used to live there, and of course I grew up there and visited very, very often as I grew older. When lockdown is over, I think I want to. I don't know that life will ever be exactly the same again, but I would love to see my friends face to face. I'd love to see my team. I'd like to be back in a life that is not in this, little room that we tend to live in. So. Yeah,
I'm just hearing you say that, Doc, because we're always hoping that all the doctors know more. And so the fact that you know more and you are saying it may never go back to exactly how it was is sobering. For us lay folks, it's kind of just, not knowing helps us be more optimistic, perhaps.
But it will get better. We will have a vaccine. We will be able to take precautions. It's not going to be tomorrow, but it will be better. Will we ever take certain risks again? It depends on who you are. And it may become sort of a more common, treatable, common cold. We have to see.
Yeah.
We'll have to see.
Well, thanks to your work and others, we have a shot at this, so we appreciate that. My father's watching from Kerala in India. Have you been to India?
Oh, I've been many, 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 many times.
What's a memory of India you'd like to share? Where have you been?
So largely, we did a lot of work with in the last probably 7 years with the government on redesigning the regulations for clinical trials in India. So I did most of my work in Delhi and Mumbai, but have traveled through Rajasthan and many other places.
Did you make it to the Taj? Did you make it to the Taj?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's so.
The time I went to India was 1983. It's changed a bit from there.
It's changed a lot from there. That's right. Paula Kiger's watching from Tallahassee. Have you been?
I have not been to Tallahassee. I've been to Florida, but not to Tallahassee.
Paula is on my team at Digimentors, and she's an absolutely fabulous editor and social media person. And so is Stefan Kaplan from Ramsey, New Jersey. Hope everyone is well. This will undoubtedly be a fascinating discussion. Not everybody has enough memories of New Jersey, but I'm sure you've been.
Sure.
And one of the things that Stefan does, he's on our team, and he produces an excellent show himself that runs on Saturdays. Let me just show you that program here. Just 1 second. So it's called the Spin It Social Hour, and let's talk photography and social media. And this week he has a guest, Jeffrey Salter from Miami, and he talks about photography with world famous photographers. He's himself a former photo editor of the New York Times. So everybody, 10 a.m. Eastern, please tune in so that you can catch this episode. I know you will learn a lot and enjoy it. I'll also tell you about another show that we're doing right after that. Tomorrow's show is episode 158 with Vikas Khanna. This is a show that's going to mark India's Independence Day, August 15th. And as you can see, this chef has a Michelin star and a mission, feeding millions in India's lockdown. Episode 54, he was here. So 104 episodes later, he has distributed 25 million meals to old age homes and orphanages in India. So he'll be with us at 12:30 p.m. on Saturday. So please join us if you can, 12:30 p.m. Eastern time. When he joined us first, it was just 2 million meals. So we're marking the anniversary of India's independence with that news. All right, let's keep going. A couple of more messages and then we'll take a break. Long Island, Rajan says hello, and he's tagging Hart. He says, I know you're at work, but you might want to catch the replay as your schedule permits. And my father jumps in to say, anxious to hear about the vaccine. That is, I know a lot of people are curious about that. So explain what you understand about where we are with the vaccines. It's plural, right? It's lots of people are working on this. It's a global race to make the vaccine, and suddenly Russia announced that it had one already. So if you can put some of that in context, I know you're not personally working on a vaccine, right? So, but you have certainly friends and colleagues around the world. So please go ahead.
I do, and I should say at the outset, I am not an expert. But let me say that it's not the vaccine. There are probably over 70 vaccines now in various stages of development. The first thing I would say is it is remarkable how quickly we have come together to understand this virus, to sequence the virus, to understand the physiology of it, and then to develop not one, not two, but 4 different ways of approaching a vaccine, and then 70 or more different products that may be successful. And what we're looking for is the ability to stimulate the immune system through a vaccine so that the body's prepared to see the virus if it attacks and fight it before it infects. So that's the idea behind a vaccine. What we use to measure efficacy, whether it works or not, is to look in the blood whether you have antibodies against, whether the vaccine has produced antibodies against the virus itself, and whether it, what we say, neutralizes the virus, makes it less infective. And so we're seeing already evidence that we can, not we, I don't take credit for this, but my colleagues and others can get an antibody response. What we now have to see is over the long term, will that protect against an actual virus infection, number one? And number two, how long does that last? You know, we all get the flu, and maybe not all, but many of us get the flu vaccine every year. It's largely effective. It certainly makes flu, if you get it, much less severe, but we need to get it every year. Unlike the tetanus vaccine, which we get every 10 years, and maybe we don't need it as much as that. And unlike, for instance, HPV vaccine, which you get twice or 3 times, and then you're protected for life against that virus. So we need to know more about the natural history of those, of the antibodies that we produce, and whether that it's going to be protective over the long term. So that's sort of where we are right now. There are some few vaccines that are starting. I explained before, the clinical trials first look at safety, then does it have any efficacy? Does it have any antibody? And then a big trial to see if it really works in many people. There are certain candidates, vaccines that are now in what we call phase 3 trials. The last thing that happens before our regulators, the FDA, will review the data and see if it's safe enough and effective enough to be marketed and approved and marketed.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Father, for the question.
I will. I'm sure he's happy to hear the answer. Charlotte, North Carolina, Rick Botello says, are you familiar with the different types of vaccines, such as COVAX, and which ones are promising at this stage? Even though it's early days, I'll just point out another question, and feel free. We want to be very careful about the information we give out. If you're not comfortable at any point, of course, you can say no. Jenny Matthews says, what is the likelihood that the vaccine from Russia has been tested rigorously? I'm in Bangalore, India.
So let me say, I can give neither a definitive answer. I don't know enough about the candidate vaccines and the data behind those vaccines to say which are the most likely to be effective. All I can say is that we have a true army of vaccines now that we can test, and all of us are certain that a number of them, probably not one, probably a number of them will be effective. How long, how good, we have to learn. I have not seen the data from Russia, so I can't comment on that.
I don't think they've shared their data at all, right, with anybody. Yeah, no. So that's part of it. But is Russia known generally for its clinical trials? I know in the Soviet days they did have massive vaccination programs and things like that. What is the state of kind of Russian clinical trials? Do they participate in global exchanges, things like that? Let's set aside the coronavirus vaccine.
Yeah. So Russia is a state or a country where many global clinical trials are performed. And they certainly participate in the global effort to develop new drugs. Comparatively, I can't comment, and I'm sure that it depends not just on the country, but also on the disease and on the site, the center, the medical center where that trial is conducted, as well as the approach of and training of the investigators, just like it is here. So we'll have to see the data in order to know.
I hear you. Also, what is the likelihood that the protection from this proposed vax is long lasting? Is there any reason that this kind of vaccine would be less, because of the speed at which it will come out, that if it had taken the usual 3 to longer period of time, it would be more effective? Or how do you think about those issues?
So I don't think that the speed of discovery of the vaccine has anything to do with how long the effect of a good antibody effect will last, nor how long the vaccine will be effective. What matters is the sort of biology of what we call the immune response, and then how long that lasts, and whether it is sufficient to persist for years. We also know that in the case of flu, and coronavirus is in the same family, although not the same virus. We know that in the flu case, that the virus actually mutates; it changes year to year. We don't know that about coronavirus. We don't know that. So we'll have to learn a lot. We're at the beginning, even though we've made enormous progress, we're really at the beginning of understanding this and moving forward together. And I have to say that one of the best things about this, there are some wonderful lessons we've learned, but one of them is the degree of global cooperation that we've seen, and also the number of companies that are working together and putting aside all the sort of competitive aspects and really sort of working with the NIH and with investigators and pushing to conquer and to contribute to the health of this nation and the world.
All right, we're just going to go to a couple of more comments. Kathleen is watching from California. Just got back from a short hike near, but not at Muir Beach. Ashok is asking from Kerala also, do you think any vaccine will be effective with the mutation happening in the virus? So if you can explain that, like are we already seeing a mutation, or does he mean that will come in subsequent years the way it does with the flu?
Yeah, I think he probably means will it come in subsequent years. with the flu, and frankly, this is the first year we've looked at it, so we'll have to see over years how quickly it can mutate. I'm sure that there is a mutation frequency. What that is going to be and whether that impacts our viral response or our antibody response to the virus, we need to learn. So what you're seeing on the screen is a set of flyers that we developed at the MRCT Center that's really there to help potential participants decide whether to volunteer to be in a vaccine trial or a drug treatment trial. What we found is that particularly in the early days of COVID, when people were arriving at the hospital sick or worried that they were sick or getting sicker, that they were asked to be in trials in order to learn something about how best to treat these individuals without ever understanding what a trial was. What did it mean to be asked to participate in a trial? What were the alternatives if they said no? What happens to the data? What happens if I get injured because of the trial? All sorts of questions, independent of what the actual trial was, just to prepare the participants to have that conversation with their doctor or the researcher. Or should I give blood at this time? Should I be tested for antibodies? Should I be tested for coronavirus? So we developed a suite of flyers for the public so that when you are thinking about it, you can decide whether or not you're interested and what the alternatives are in thinking about volunteering for a clinical trial.
That is so helpful. So can you just talk about this particular set of pictures we're looking at? What is, how does one use this and how does one decide what the answers are to these? And then we'll tell people where to find all of them as well.
Yeah, sure. So they're really written for the individual, for the public, not for the doctor, so that you can prepare yourself to ask good questions of the doctor. Of course, all of the answers to those questions are going to be very specific for which trial you're being asked to join, or are you a child? Are you a sick child, a well child? Are you hospitalized? Or are you not hospitalized? Are you a family member, not a family member? And then one would use this to prepare the questions for the team. And then sort of empowering the individuals to do that, because often when confronted with a new disease and really an inability to think about what the alternatives are, people don't feel that they have a choice. And we wanted to make sure that individuals knew that they were empowered to make that choice, and that they should have all the information and they should be comfortable asking about that information or for that information. So that's why we did it. And it's currently only in English. We are currently translating it into Spanish. And we have collaborators that are interested in translating them into other languages. I have to say on your show, particularly with the global audience that you have, if individuals are interested in translating them with us, we'd really love the help. But we are true believers that we want to make sure that we make all of our information available in a language that's comfortable for the participants, and not sort of English first. So we'd love help. And this is what you're seeing here is an example of one of those flyers, basically saying what is a research study, so a couple of bullets about COVID-19. Why are we doing research studies? Why do we need to do them now? And what kinds of questions should I ask if asked to be in trial. I have to say, in the early days, Boston was a hotspot of COVID-19. We had people calling the hospital to volunteer to be in a trial. That's how committed the public was. And we really appreciate that kind of dedication and service, and the ability to sort of use that volunteerism and that sort of spirit to learn how to help take care of patients better. It's been a real community effort.
I'm just looking at this and so impressed by your work, Doc. Thank you so much for sharing with us and the world. Everyone, go to mrctcenter.org, mrctcenter.org, and learn about this. Tell your friends about this. We have so much information that's on the internet that's not useful at this time, but here's something you can do. These flyers are something that everybody in the world should get to see. And as she said, she's asking for help so that they can be translated. So please check out the website and learn more about their really important work. So I think this is really cool that you're doing this and making it so open. I think one of the complaints that people always have about some of this kind of work is that it's sort of opaque, it's hard to understand. And here you are being really, as I use the word, kind of helpful and useful to the everyday folks that you're trying to help. Let's go to some more comments that are coming in. How many countries, which ones, are working together on this research and development?
That's a great question. So let me just say that every Thursday morning at 8 a.m., we have a preparedness conference, which is organic. People just come. So far, there are 60 countries, 65 countries that are represented that just come to learn from each other and to work together. Wow. The regulatory agencies have a group that work together. Of course, Europe always works together. They've been incredibly collaborative with the FDA, with Health Canada, with the African nations, with South America, Latin America, with Australia. I think this is, and I'm leaving out many, but this is a global pandemic. So far, I don't think there is a country that is spared. And the regulators, the companies, the sites, the investigators, and social network are working together to learn more.
That's so great to hear. Your mission, among other things, is to achieve diversity, inclusion, and equity in clinical research. Let's make it clear to everyone why this matters, and also tell us about the center itself. What should people know about it? What is its name itself? If you can explain mrctcenter.org, that people can check out, and what they can find there. I think a lot of people would benefit from this. And folks, take a screenshot, send this to your friends so that they can check this out. Here is the URL. I'll just put it on the screen again. You can see it with her name, mrctcenter.org.
So the Multi-Regional Clinical Trials Center is a research and policy center that we started about 10 years ago because in order to look at the ethics, conduct, regulatory environment, and patient centricity of multinational and multi-site clinical trials. Clinical trials are often done not at a single site, one health center, but rather the same trial is done in many centers. We get answers quicker. We understand the population better. We broaden the population of study by doing that. But there are lots of coordination issues. There are lots of regulatory issues and also lots of ethical issues, not only between states, but also across countries. So we do that work by bringing together stakeholders to figure out what the challenge is, what is the problem, and then to invite everybody that is involved in the problem. That's regulators, industry, academics, healthcare providers, your normal doctor, patient advocates, sometimes pharmacies or journal editors if you're worrying about publication and communication. And then all of us sort of address the problem and, importantly, figure out approaches to solve that problem. And we've done a number of different kinds of efforts. One, for instance, on returning results to participants. People will easily volunteer to be in a trial, but then never hear the results of that trial. They don't hear whether it was effective, whether it helped. They don't hear what their results were. So we wanted to address that and came up with recommendations for that. Then we found that when you're returning results to people, you have to do it in a way that people then understand what you're telling them. You can't talk in medical jargon. You have to talk in a way that is understandable. And too often we talk about low health literacy, where individuals cannot understand what doctors are saying. We turn that around and say doctors need to communicate in a way that's understandable to the person. It's not their problem that we're not understandable. It's our problem that we're not saying it in plain English in good design. So we had a health literacy effort. At that point, we also realized that we had a huge problem with diversity in clinical trials, that despite the fact that the incidence, how often a disease occurred, how severe it was, how sick patients got from it, and that being disproportionate in Black and African American individuals, in Latinx individuals, in certain underserved populations, that our clinical trials, the drugs we're developing to treat those individuals, do not, in the clinical trials, reflect the diversity of the disease. And that's why we started this diversity, inclusion, and equity in clinical research, because frankly, if you don't study and learn from the people affected by the disease, you can never develop a drug that you know is effective for that disease. You can develop a drug that says it's likely, because we don't have evidence, it isn't as good, but that's very different than saying we know it's as good, or at least won't hurt this population. So we started looking at diversity in clinical trials, and it's a persistent problem. It's been true as long as we've done clinical trials, and that came out of a certain protectionism, because of course, as we all know from issues like Tuskegee and others, that there's been a real, in the early days before we had these protections for human participants, people were recruited to trials without their knowledge often, and in very problematic ways. But now we really need to include those people affirmatively, and as something that is important for many reasons, not the least of which is we need to develop trust that what we're doing is treating those patients appropriately. So that's why we did it. And then, of course, with the events of the last several months occurring with systemic and systematic racism in our country, our work landed at just the right time. People are looking for answers or approaches, things they can do differently. And we took a lot of time to develop sort of suggestions for how to do this work differently. How do you recruit differently? How do you recruit in a culture that you're unfamiliar with? How do you think about translation? How do you think about access? About making clinical trial participation less burdensome for the participant, even if it means it's a little more difficult for the clinician. Who are we if we're not taking care of people? So one of the other great things, if there is a great thing about coronavirus, and the pandemic is that we've gotten much more comfortable on Zoom, in telemedicine, so that there's an ability to have virtual clinical trials in a way that we can have a virtual visit with a patient, and that patient can be seen, as it were, over Zoom or GoToMeeting. And instead of spending 2 hours in the car coming from New Hampshire to Boston, looking for a parking space, paying for the parking space, going to the waiting room, waiting another hour to be seen, for the doctor to come in and say, oh, you look well, how are you feeling? I feel fine. Oh, great, see you in a month. So, and then home again. Instead of that, we can do that kind of visit over the video or over the phone. And that I think is the kind of change that we've now grown comfortable with, which will help.
Sure. Thank you so much. I'm just looking at my copy of the Wall Street Journal today. It says the COVID storm, a pandemic was inevitable, as all the, everybody keeps saying, and they're saying it'll happen again. Why was no one ready is the headline here. And, you work at Harvard Medical School, one of the leading health institutions in the world. You interact every day with your colleagues around the world. What is the answer to that question? I know you don't have all the answers, but it feels to those of us who are out in the world, and especially, why has America failed so badly compared to other countries? So I don't want you to speak for the entire medical establishment, but certainly you have thoughts on this.
I do. So I think it's hard to invest in preparedness if there isn't a sense of urgency about that. And what it's sort of, if you never think you're going to have an accident, do you still get car insurance? Well, we know the likelihood of having a car accident sometime in your life is not zero. But we haven't had this kind of a pandemic in a while. We've had threats of it. Other countries have had it, like Ebola, but it didn't come here except for a patient or 2 or 4. We've had swine flu, which never developed, but people don't really believe that, or did not really believe that this kind of thing could happen. And it's also hard to prepare for an eventuality when you don't know the nature of what that eventuality will be. Do you invest in, should you spend money to invest in efforts to prevent, forest fires or a pandemic? There are so many things we have to attend to, but I think this lesson is now learned. We need to invest, and we need to maintain vigilance, and we need global cooperation to look at the kinds of things that we can do together to anticipate if there's a infection in one location or another problem in a location, that we support each other to contain it, to understand it, and then to help one another get through it. Because the world is a global world. People get on airplanes now, they get on cruise ships, and there's no longer sort of the natural barrier of how far someone can walk. So we're in a different world now than we were.
Doc, one of the things that upsets me so much is that there are still people who believe a lot of this is a hoax and other words like that. You still hear that today from some officials, from others. You may have seen the sheriff in Florida who said, the debate is over. So I was excited. The debate is over. Wear masks. No, the debate is over. No need for masks. Right. He announced to his 900-person department in Florida. That's just, and multiply that by thousands of places all over this country. What do we do for those folks? How do we help them understand?
This gets into a huge area, which is much more your area than my area. Sort of how do we balance communication so that there's trust in the news we receive, and that we know what are trustworthy sources, and how do we develop that kind of evidence. That's why I think for our role in it as scientists and doctors and caregivers, we have to be sure that the data that we put out there, that we collect, that we put out, and that we trust has integrity and is balanced and is not premature and not questionable. And that takes a coordinated effort, and there's no easy answer for it.
And that's, of course, something that we all have to work on together. And I like that how you threw that into my court. I appreciate that. We are going to be joined in just a minute by my friend, Dr. Marina Kurian, who is the host of a terrific show on Sundays called She's on Call. And I'm going to ask her to just kind of reflect on what she's been hearing in the backstage as she's been hanging out with us for a little while. But I just wanted to show you a couple of other comments that came in. Kathleen says, what you've been saying is reassuring. Paulo says, hello from Vegas. Is there a Vegas story you're allowed to share in public?
Absolutely. So when I first got married 40 years ago, we went to Las Vegas, and my husband literally could not get me out of the airport because I started playing the slots. That's when I realized that I cannot gamble. Absolutely cannot gamble.
So that's a unique story where you didn't even get to leave the terminal, because that's right. They have the slots at the gate, and that is something that, well, first time you see it is, and then of course in the 40 years, Vegas has changed. Apollo was on our show to talk about life under COVID in Vegas, and also what it was like to be an African-American living in India and Bangladesh, and what were the issues and opportunities and all that he lived through. It was fascinating. Everyone can find our archive stories on our website, so you can check that out. And he says, and yep. And we have one more question here, and then we'll bring in Dr. Kurian. Tamina asks, do you think the trials are safe for people with underlying conditions? And I know you have flyers for each of these questions, but what's a quick answer?
That's a wonderful question. The people who design the trials are very specific about what the likelihood of safety is in those individuals with underlying conditions. And we'll start with people without them if we're looking at safety. And then as we know it's safe, because we know once a drug is marketed, if somebody has hypertension or diabetes, they may get the drug. We need to understand what it's going to do in a controlled environment with people with those disorders. So we're very careful to include individuals in trials with underlying conditions. That's not if you're aiming to treat the underlying conditions, but as an aside, in order to learn about that where we can make sure it's safe and effective.
Thank you, folks. You're listening to a conversation with Barbara Bierer. She's a doctor at Harvard Medical School, and she runs mrctcenter.org and is here to talk about the value of making sure there's diversity and inclusion in clinical trials. We're now going to bring on stage our friend Marina Kurian. She's a surgeon in New York, and she hosts this awesome show, She's on Call, Sundays at 11 a.m. Eastern. And she and our other friend, Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar, both discuss health news, and they have guests. So let's bring her on. She's been listening in the background. Hi, Marina.
Hey, how are you?
Thanks for being here on a Friday night. Say hello to Dr. Bierer.
Yes, hi, how are you?
I'm good.
I want to tell you, Barbara, that I'm so, you can't go to Vegas because you gamble. I can't go. I mean, I can go to Vegas because I don't gamble. Like, I hate losing.
I don't gamble anymore. I learned my lesson in one walk.
I'm totally I like it for the food and the pools. Like, that's all I do. I go there. The food is amazing. So many great restaurants, right? And I want to thank you. We in New York, we got hit hard. I know Massachusetts got hit pretty hard too. And the one thing that all of us in medicine have been saying, right, is that we're so, it's scary. It's unprecedented, spelled the correct way. We all know what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And it's an unusual virus, and what we've done in the past is not enough, and we've all learned. So we learned from our colleagues in China who instruct the Italians, and then we learned from both of them here in the US and certainly in New York and throughout the country. And then we learned even more things as it was going on. However, what we have learned, and I love that your center is really looking at this, is that certain populations are at greater risk. And whether it's because, what is the disparity? Is it access to care? Is it lack of messaging? Is it just close quarters? It's all those things. And the one thing that we've all said, though, is that as physicians, as a group, we're all learning so much from this virus that we don't want to be learning this much. Actually, we want to have the answers, right? Yeah. And what we're doing is learning and preparing. And I think, all the things that you guys already mentioned about, and I'm sure, our constant messaging is social distancing and wear a mask, wash your hands, all those things are still important, which is not something that is embraced. I heard you guys talking about that. Sheriff, I didn't even have the heart to open it. I couldn't read that article because I was just like, why are you doing this? Because I do think there's enough data out there. And actually, one of the studies, the first studies that came out was a Boston hospital. Was it BU? Who came out with it? But somebody came out with it looking at what happened in terms of COVID transmission before and after everybody was mandated to wear masks in the hospital. So it made a big difference.
Huge difference. Yeah. And we now know it really is probably the most important safeguard against transmission. But to your point, one of the things that is most upsetting is knowing that the incidence and severity for minority populations is so much worse. Mm-hmm. We do not collect the data to know why. We don't have social determinants of health. We don't collect their, how do they get to work? Do they take public transportation or can they walk? How many people do they live with at home? Are they an essential worker? All of these kinds of questions, we don't know. So we don't know whether it's underlying diabetes, hypertension. Is it genetic differences? Is it these social aspects? And so we can't make headway yet. We have to start being really disciplined about being comfortable asking those questions so that we can learn, what are the important factors? Just like years ago, it was noticed in Boston Children's Hospital, the kids with asthma had, if they were Black and Hispanics, had much worse asthma, uncontrolled. And what they did as one of the major interventions was give all the families vacuum cleaners, because there was just so much more dust where they lived. And if we don't think about these things, we can't possibly get behind a health equity agenda that we need to do, So
I was out earlier today with colleagues, healthcare professionals, and two of them worked at the hospital. Both of them got COVID, and they're like, I was sick. It was horrible. They were both really sick. But at one point, there was a breakdown in tears because they realized their mortality, right? Like one of them, and my girlfriend is younger than her husband. She was like, "You were supposed to die before me because you're older than me." It's terrible. Like you're not talking like that. But the both of them realized like how bad they each had it, and they were never expecting this kind of level of disease and that whole thought process of going toward death. And there's a 27-year-old child, and you know what I mean? Like you're not expecting any of that, and that is why when I see things like the sheriff who's like, don't wear a mask, how do you know that and part of it is that they feel they both got it early on, like early March, because they were exposed, because no one knew the level of PPE that was actually needed. It was also before in New York, they're both healthcare work at one of the hospitals in New York before we realized how many patients were positive. Our testing was up and running, right? So it's just
and now we have kids that are positive and not symptomatic. I mean, some are, but many aren't.
Right.
But we go home and pass it on. And do we let them go to school? Do we test them and then keep them home? And what does that mean? And, we've got a lot of social issues we need to figure out together.
You know what? I agree, but I'm sending my kids to college. It's happening. They're going, and I'm like, okay, you guys are going to college.
And mine are done.
I'm not trying to send them. I'd love for them to be here, but they're like, we've had enough of you. We've been you since
it's 6 months already, Mom.
We're done. Because I'm like, I started breakfast. I'm like, what do you guys think you want for dinner? And they're like, oh my God. I'm like, I know, I'm food obsessed.
Breakfast.
I don't want anyone to go home hungry. I'm ethnic. After all, somebody you have to eat.
What an amazing conversation. I feel like I'm eavesdropping on two doctors at the top of their game, having a great and important conversation. We didn't have that moment where doctors talk to each other about where they work. Why don't we have that moment? I don't think, Marina, I introduced you properly to Dr. Bierer. So tell her where you are, and then immediately you'll all know each other, people in common, even if you're different disciplines. That's what I've found. Marina,
I know plenty of people where she works, but I'm actually in private practice now, but I'm at NYU and Lenox Hill here in New York. I'm a general surgeon, but I do a lot of minimally invasive foregut and bariatric surgery. But I do a radio show on Dr. Radio on Sirius XM where I am the primary care medicine host. So you can imagine, I was like, you guys know, like, I'm a surgeon, right? Like, I don't want any of the primary care people to be all mad that I'm doing the show. But anyway,
thank you for communicating so beautifully. It's important.
All the work you're doing, because quite honestly, I'm just the beneficiary. I get to read the articles and review it. And as physicians, we're able to distill that information to our patients. And so my patients are thankful to me, but I'm thankful to everyone doing the research, because otherwise, without that, I'm applying critical thinking, but it's still, there's a lot of thought that goes into those articles before they come to us.
Yeah.
May I ask both of you a quick question? What is it like to be a doctor in this day and age where there is so much information, some of it accurate, a lot of it accurate, some of it not. The availability of all this material when people walk into your offices, how does it affect your work? Is it hard for them, like you say something and then they say, no, but I read in a study that they may not even understand, but they think they read something and understood it. So Marina, how do you deal with that? And I'll ask Dr. Bierer the same thing.
Hey, Dr. Google's a thing. Like, there's a time when I'm in a pinch and someone tells me something, I'm like, what medication is that? And I'll go right to Google and I'll look it up and I'll come up on, one of the sites and I'll review it. But I tend to, a lot of times we kind of, as physicians say, like, Google's not a doctor. But what I will say is when patients come to me with all these concerns, I take that moment because they really did all the research and they're trying to understand. And my job is really not to necessarily, since I do surgery, sell a surgery, but really explain the data to them and hopefully help crystallize their thought process on it. So it's not that, I'm trying to force my opinion on them. I'm trying to go through the data with them. But there are some studies out there that, are not great, but then there are other excellent studies. So it's sort of just going through it. My favorite is when the patient comes to me and they're like, okay, I printed out some questions for you. I'm like, okay, show them to me. 108 questions. I'm like, wait a second, we don't have enough time. You guys are gonna have to give me that I went through some of them, but so we at least go through some of the questions together, so.
And I feel the same. I think that the way that medicine is practiced now is much more a partnership with the patient, and that our ability to listen, even if we're surrounded by computers and all sorts of technologies, that is the art of medicine, and making sure that you know what your patients are thinking and worrying about, and giving them the license to express that, I think is very important. They've done the work, as you say, and it's up to us to help digest it and help them make an informed decision for themselves, which is part of why, in the work that we did, we spend a lot of time talking about, cultural sensitivity. You have to be able to say to a patient, is there anything that I need to know about you, to help take care of you, and give them the chance to talk to you a bit about what their life is like and what the constraints are and what their religious practices are, so that you're comfortable sort of saying, okay, don't come in on Saturday. It's like, but if we never have the conversation, you make all these assumptions based on your own heritage that may or might not be appropriate. So we've got to be in a different space for this.
All right. Before we let Marina go, I just wanted to ask you to talk to Marina about two quick things. One is, I saw Columbia University announce today that all their undergrad education is going to be online. You were saying your child is going to college, so they're in a different place. But here in New York City, and that was mostly to do with the dorms and having New York City's self-quarantine rules. You have to be quarantined in a room with your own bathroom, and that's almost impossible to do for a student situation. How do you think about that? What do you think about that? And how do parents make that decision? We saw Sanjay Gupta said he is not sending his kids to school in Georgia.
Well, you have to look at the positivity rates where the schools are. And I've said before that I think that all of the educators out there understand the concept of summer slide, which is really very important in the younger years, maybe middle school, lower school, and even high school. But for college, I think going to college is an important experience, and I do believe that all of the educators at these different universities have the students' best interests at heart and not their bottom line. And honestly, bottom line in many cases not affected. I just read an article today that most of the colleges are still charging full tuition for online teaching. So it's not a financial issue. There's a couple that are like, hey, we're giving a 15% discount but on the tuition, but in general, it's still full on because they still have to support their staff, their grounds, everybody that makes the college function. But I do think that where my kids are going to school, both of the leadership and the administration there have really looked at this and they feel that it's safe to proceed. And I think it is safe provided, I believe in masks. I have colleagues even that are not believers in masks. I will say, Barbara and Sree, I'll admit to everyone, I was like all about those gaiters. I'm like, oh my God, it's wicking away moisture. I need those, but those are the crappiest masks. Apparently, they're no good, right? So I have other masks also. Being a surgeon, if I didn't have masks, and the kids have other masks as well. But I think 2-ply, 3-ply masks are much better than those gaiters, and I think that if they're doing that, and I've watched my children during the quarantine, they're really good. They have their bubbles. They come in, they're wearing masks all the time. They wash their hands, and they've been tested multiple times. Every time, they tend not to introduce anyone new into their bubble. So the new bubble will be when they go to college, but they got it. And the beauty of these teenagers and young adults is that they're all about FaceTime. And with my daughters in quarantine, they didn't even want to go to the store. I'm like, can you go to the pharmacy, pick something up for me? They're like, no.
Yeah.
But they're on with their friends, and they're all okay because they're used to that. But I do think that going to school is an important aspect of their lives. And I think that the schools are planning some online and some in-person classes. Maybe the professors won't be in the lecture room, but they'll be remotely telecasting. But I think that sort of relationship is still an important part of life.
Sure. Dr. Marina Kurian is our guest, was stopping by to say hello to our other guest, Dr. Barbara Bierer. And this is your show on Sunday. Want to just quickly tell us about it?
Yeah, well, okay. So we're doing a show and on Sunday, which is our usual slot from 11 to 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And Dr. Sujana and I are going to be talking to Dr. Ananta Dave and also Dr. Anupama Gatmukula, and we're talking to them just about, kind child psychiatry, pediatric anesthesia. We're going to take a lot of questions, hopefully, from our audience. And it also happens to be an interesting weekend. It's Indian Independence Day around that time. Just happened to be that we were able to get these guests on all together. But it should be a great show because there's a lot of issues with mental health, along with the quarantine and what's happening with the schools or lack of schools and kids. And so it's going to be great to talk to them. And then certainly we're going to get into some of the aspects of anesthetic care for kids and during this, because, you know, as a general surgeon, we didn't see a lot of appendicitis or a lot of the other things that we normally see very routinely. And what we found is that we've had patients coming in with actually worse, more severe disease because it was prolonged and put off. And we're also seeing that with kids. So we're going to talk to our pediatric anesthesiologist about those kids in that care.
Thank you, Marina. That's going to be a great show. It's going to be our first international show because you're going to have a guest from London who's going to be joining us. And it is you're right, the day after Indian Independence Day. And so to see these amazing Indian immigrants who've gone to different parts of the world and are helping local communities, I think is going to be very special. Thank you very much, Marina. We'll see you on Sunday morning.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thanks so much, Dr. Bierer, also.
Thank you. And thank you.
It was just great to have her with us. And Dr. Bierer, I know it's way over our time. I know you have big Friday night plans right now, the clubbing and things like that.
Exactly.
So I want to make sure you were able to get across the various points you wanted to with your with the amazing work you're doing. Is there anything else that we can show from the website? I'm just going to go on to the website and show people where they can learn more information. We're putting the address right on the screen again, mrctcenter.org, mrctcenter.org. And let's go to the website again, and you can just kind of walk us through what people will find here. This is the part of the clinical trials that you are focused on about diversity, inclusion, and equity in clinical trials. And you can download the guidance document. There's a whole toolkit, the flyers, all of this work. Tell us about the two institutions that are leading this effort, please.
So the leadership is from the MRCT Center in collaboration with an individual from Merck who is very committed to this, and Luther Clark, David Strauss, who is a psychiatrist at Columbia. And we were fortunate that individuals from the FDA joined the leadership of the group throughout it. And that's Milena Loeb, who works on FDA snapshots under Janet Woodcock, and importantly, Rear Admiral Sharday Arajo, who is the director of the Office of Health Equity, Minority Health and Health Equity. Sorry, I had to pause. And then we also had about 50 individuals working with us to develop an analysis of the problem and a set of recommendations for how we can change in the future. I'm sure that this is just the beginning of this journey in terms of how do we make effective change, but we need to plan. We need to understand it's our responsibility to make sure that people are included, and we need to make sure that we equip ourselves with the ability to understand the variations in health and disease that individuals in its diverse richness embrace. And we need to do that work, and we haven't been able to because we haven't paid sufficient affirmative attention to our responsibility in that regard. But the time is now to change.
That's terrific. And this is what you were talking about before, the leadership. People can find that there. And there's just a lot of other really useful information here as well. And you put out a statement on racism.
We did.
And why did you do that? And what did it say? Well,
I think that It's largely because I think at no time, particularly now, can we be silent, and that silence itself is complicity, and that we need to stand together and stand firm to be comfortable having sort of committing to anti-racism and having tough conversations where they are necessary. We have to become a society that is indeed, sort of appreciates how difficult this future will be, and wanted to make sure we took an affirmative stance to support our colleagues and our employees and others in this effort.
I'm just going to read a little bit of this. We cannot be silent, as you said. Black Lives Matter. And you said the MRCT Center's work in bioethics seeks to sort right from wrong, to protect the vulnerable, and to advance an agenda that assists everyone across the nation and the world. The foundation of an ethical society is justice. Is justice, and Black Lives Matter. I think it's beautifully put and so important for everybody to understand that. And then this is the website of the center itself, mrctcenter.org. We encourage everybody to check that out. There's something, the JTF Core Competency Survey from the Joint Task Force on Clinical Trial Competency. Lots to read. Of course, some of this will be technical for folks, but they will still, I think, benefit from looking through and understanding the work that you're doing. So
we're very open to individuals reaching out to us, and we're stronger for the community that we engage in, and we'd love to hear from you if you have ideas of work or that you think should be done, or problems that you see, or want to help us in the work that we're doing. We'd love to invite you to help.
And I know that your colleagues are very responsive on Twitter, so everyone should contact. I'm sure there's contact information on the website, yeah, but also on Twitter at MRCT Center. Everyone, please check out what's happening there and contact them as well. And before you go, any kind of closing thoughts to?
No, I want to thank you.
I think I told your team we'd have you on for 30, 35 minutes. Here we are an hour and 17 minutes later. I apologize. Thank you.
No, I've enjoyed it. I've learned a lot, and I really appreciate your having me. It's important work, and it's important work to communicate, and it's important work to do together and to change the future as we see it.
Here is some of the comments coming in. Rajan says, this is a great statement. Thank you, Dr. Bierer. And Jonathan, who's watched 157 episodes and watched every minute of yours right now, says great points about explaining clinical trials. Thank you. Rose says, she's my producer, can you ask Dr. Bierer about some of the striking numbers about lack of diversity, white, blacks, Hispanics, Asians? So we don't want to go down another rabbit hole, but just what is the answer to that question?
So it's very variable by disease area. Obviously, if you look across, different diverse groups, and let's just take COVID-19 as an example. The incidence and severity of COVID-19 in Black, African American, Hispanic, or Latinx, Asian, Pacific Islander, and Native American is much greater than their representation in society. And yet they are underrepresented systematically in clinical trials to treat and prevent the disease. So that's a good example. You can look at many diseases. Blacks are twice as likely per 100,000 to get multiple myeloma, a certain kind of cancer. But of the clinical trials that led to approval of, for instance, 3 medicines to treat multiple myeloma, the numbers of whites outnumbered the number of blacks by 7 to 20-fold. So, these are the kinds of statistics that are, just means we need to do this work differently.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Rajan says, very grateful for this show. Thanks all. He also had a comment that I wanted to share while Dr. Bierer was still here. He said that I'm promulgating this link. That's not a word you hear often. And you don't get to say that out loud. So Rajan writes, I'm promulgating the link to this show to my Facebook story and wall, as well as to a group composed of many of my Filipino cousins, nearly all of whom are in healthcare here in the US and abroad. As you know, lots of Filipinos work in hospitals all around this country, all around the world. Sree, and as many of the many regulars know, my mother died of COVID-19 on April 27th. So I thought this show would be of extreme interest to my extended family. And I would just say to Rajan, your mother gave her life to medicine. She worked as a nurse for 50 years. And he saw her just a few weeks before she passed. He was in a nursing home. He shared all of this with us. It was so sad. And this is one of the sadder aspects of all of this, is been the isolation at a time when we want to be most close together, at times of sickness and pain, and even at death's door, people are not being able to be together. And thank you, Rajan, for sharing that, and everybody who's spoken up. Sorry we didn't get to all the comments, but she answered a lot of questions. And Apollo said, I just wanted to listen tonight. And Makarand is asking if Dr. Bierer is on LinkedIn. I know you are on LinkedIn. That's great.
I am.
But your work is the work and not the social media. And that's why you leave that to your colleagues who are, I see, even on a Friday night, your colleagues are tweeting and supporting you and encouraging you at this time. This is all things that would not happen in normal circumstances on a Friday in August. People in America are not available, but here we are at 10:30 talking about the worst issue to hit America in a century, and we are all trying to learn. And we're so grateful to you, Dr. Bierer, for being with us, for being so open and supportive of all of us as we ask very basic questions to you. And thank you. And Aparna's got the two hands up, and that's a great compliment. So we'll let you go. And,
thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for taking care of us.
Thank you. Oh my God. Thank you, folks. One of the things I'll be doing, Dr. Bierer, that if you are still listening, you might find out is, after my guest leaves, I reintroduce them, because people have been watching and they're not, they joined right at the end. They're not sure what they've just seen. So I'll be doing that right now. But first, I'll say goodbye to you. Thank you, Doc.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye-bye. And I hope to have a drink with Dr. Bierer in New York in the weeks ahead. And here is the show you were just watching. Dr. Barbara Bierer, MD, hematologist and oncologist, a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School and Brigham and Women's Hospital. She's faculty director of the Multi-Regional Clinical Trial Center of Brigham and Women's Hospital and at Harvard. And she talked about diversity, equity in clinical research. I learned so much, as I know you all did as well. Before we go on this show, one of the things we do is, in response to talking to Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, the incredible law school professor, Columbia Law professor, who coined the term intersectionality, we asked her, what can we do to be allies of African Americans? And she said, say their names. So I will take this moment, as I do every day, to say their names. And please join me as I read these names out loud. We use this cover of Time magazine by Titus Kaffer. You see a young mother with her child taken away, and you can see he made this during the pandemic. You see the blue glove on her hand, and the picture on the right, that is Larcinia Floyd with a young George Floyd in her arms. She would die 2 years almost to the day that he would be killed in Minneapolis, and they are now both buried together in Houston. And now we're going to read their names. And these are the names that are on the border of that Time magazine cover. And I will ask you, as I read these names, folks, you've heard of many of these people, but so many you haven't heard of. And think about every person with a story. Trayvon Martin, Yvette Smith, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Laquan McDonald, Tanisha Anderson, Akai Gurley, Tamir Rice, Jerame Reed, Natasha McKenna, Eric Harris, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, William Chapman, Sandra Bland, Darius Stewart, Samuel Dubose, Janet Wilson, Kaylin Rockmore, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, Joseph Mann, Terrence Crutcher, Chad Robertson, Jordan Edwards, Aaron Bailey, Stefan Clark, Danny Ray Thomas, Antoine Rose, Botham Jean, Tatiana Jefferson, Michael Dean, Ahmad Arbery, Brianna Taylor, and George Floyd. And those are just not all the names. There are so many. On other nights, we might read from a list called the Say Her Name Report, and there are dozens and dozens of names of just women. And we do this here because, as Dr. Bierer said, Black Lives Matter. And that's one of the things that has been such an education for me and our audience about in how many ways Black Lives Matter. I didn't want to bring it up in front of Dr. Bierer because it was so troubling, but there were trolls on our feed who said, oh, diversity and inclusion, that just means hatred of white people. Imagine putting your name and saying that out loud in your head, let alone saying it out loud in your room to your spouse, but putting it on the internet with your name. People wrote that tonight as we were listening about diversity and inclusion, that this is some kind of zero-sum game. If we do good things for minority communities, the majority loses. And that's the attitude that we have to fight in this country. And one of the reasons we do the show every single day. And we're always looking for your suggestions on how we can improve this show. You see my email address right there. Please be in touch and please guide us as we do this. I want to remind you of our show tomorrow that we're doing. We're very excited to bring you Chef Vikas Khanna, who has fed 25 million people sitting in New York, fed them in India. He's a Michelin star chef, as you can see from this New York Times article, and he's been feeding millions in India's lockdown. It is India's Independence Day tomorrow, episode 158, early time, 12:30 p.m. in New York, 10 p.m. in India. We're doing this early so that my producers can get a Saturday night off instead of working at 9, 10, 10:30, 10:45 as we sometimes do. And I am just so grateful to everyone who has supported this show. And thank you for watching. We now want to thank our sponsors once again for their generous support, including Muckrack Academy, Fundamentals of Social Media, this free certification now available, mrac.co/social, mrac.co/social. Also want to tell you that we have a new course that I'm offering. It's just an hour and a half on Wednesday, August 19th at 10 a.m. Eastern. We're doing a incredible panel discussion with Beatrice Frey, head of digital at UN Peacekeeping, Tik Milan, a former media strategist at GLAAD, and Dante Lacona, a senior social media officer at the International Federations of Red Cross and Red Crescent. He also was head of social at the WHO. Is called Nonprofits and Social Media, How to Cope When the World is on Fire. There's the bit.ly link. You can take a photo of it, bit.ly, NP Workshop 2020. And we want to thank our supporters, including the promotional consideration provided by Nunbelievable, divinely delicious cookies on a mission. Each handcrafted cookie provides a meal to those in need. One cookie equals one meal, 20% off with the code SREE. And we definitely want to tell you that promotional consideration has also been provided by
Hotstar Premiere Nights. Watch the year's biggest blockbusters streaming straight to your screen, exclusively on Hotstar.
A newly married couple's life is jeopardized in the new thriller Khuda Hafiz, streaming straight to your screen starting tonight. Use the code SREE2020 to get less than $4 for a subscription at hotstar.com/US. Hotstar.com/US. Somebody asked the other day, are the movies subtitled? And the answer, of course, is yes, they are subtitled. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. We're so grateful to you, and we'll see you again. You can find our archives at youtube.com/Sreenet. Please take a look, and please send us your feedback. 157 episodes are over, and 158 is coming down the track. On Sunday night, we have a very special show for you. We're going to meet the director of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum to talk about the work that they do and to talk about inclusivity and diversity in sports. Today was medicine. Sunday is sports. That's at 9 p.m. Thanks very much, everybody. We'll see you soon.